Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan, and yeah, it's been a while since we've done a mod review, but there's a cause for celebration. See, the Skaven modders have awoken from their slumber and provided yet another new Skaven clan to play around with. This is Clan GNAW, and there's a few things which make it very different to all the others. Naturally focusing around being a bit more savage, as you can tell. It's very much like if the Skaven had been inspired by the Savage Orcs. Let's talk about the faction and lord effects. The faction effects as follows: diplomatic relations +10 with all factions of Clan Molder. This means the secondary and tertiary clans too. Trapping pits. Clan GNAW actively hunts down, traps and enslaves others who dwell within the Badlands, whether they be orc, goblin or beast. Construction cost +100% for all GNAW military buildings. Recruitment cost +100% for all non-GNAW units for all armies. And +100% upkeep for all non-GNAW units. This is something that we've seen throughout many of the different Skaven clans. Finally, for the Lord effects, we have leadership +8 when fighting in desert battles for Lord's army, and attribute Vanguard deployment during the desert battles themselves, again for Lord's army. This faction can be found in the massive Skaven Clans mod. As you can tell, there's a lot of different playable factions. The idea here is to have variety, still being a Skaven faction, but being quite unique in their own regard. And I've been told by one of the modders that yes, some more Skaven clans are coming, even some that were released in Warhammer 2. It's just a matter of time, because obviously transferring files and making them up to date is going to take a little bit of time. So this faction starts in the northern Badlands, which means that you're going to be quite close to Wurzag and pretty much all the fighting that's going on in the Badlands. This is going to allow you to get a lot of different slaves and monsters, and well, yeah, just a little bit different for the Skaven. You're close enough to Tretch and Queek, but not so much that it's going to be a very similar campaign. As with all unique Skaven clans, you do have a legendary lord and some units to play around with, so we're going to talk about Dune Skulk. This guy is melee focused, as you can imagine, and he focuses up on getting a bunch of different abilities, which, you know, buffs, debuffs, all that different type of stuff. You're going to also be able to get more income from post-battle and raiding, because that's something that you're going to be doing quite a lot. This is a very aggressive faction. It's very much like playing Wurzag, but with Skaven mentality rather than using Savage Orcs. So if you like being very up close and personal, especially with some melee, it's definitely going to be a faction that you're going to want to play around with. You've also got very decent buffs for your troops, so they're going to be quite relevant throughout the rest of your campaign. Now, the unique mechanic for this faction will be the Monster Pens, which is taking from Rakaf, where you've got access to a bunch of different units, including Orc Goblin Slaves. You've also got Feral Wyverns, Manticores, and some mod-specific units, like, say, for example, some Scorpions. There's a lot for you to play around with. The idea is, just like Rakaf, you get into combat within the Badlands and different other locations. Everything is actually spelled out there, so all you have to do is hover over the specific unit that you're looking for, and it will tell you, raid here, attack there, maybe attack a Tomb King settlement for Scorpions, for example. You're also going to get access to some Rock Lobbers too, because with these Skaven, you're being a bit more savage, so you're not really going to be using Clan Scryer tech. But don't you worry, it's not all about fighting. You do have a right called Fill the Traps. It costs 5,000 treasury, and when you use it, it will actually refill those pens, so you might get lucky and get one of the big beasties very early on into your campaign, which might be quite far away from where you would normally be playing. Just a little note, as it says over there, if you want to be able to use that right, you're going to have to take over Black Crag and build up the landmark. It's not too difficult early on. I mean, you're going to be fighting other Skaven, so you might want to wait a little bit until you can actually go there, because if I recall correctly, the garrison at Black Crag is actually fairly tasty. As this clan is fairly unique in its own right, you will have access to brand new Lord and Hero options. We're going to start looking at the heroes first, with the first being the Beast Stalker. So this is a melee-focused hero, which has a little bit of ammunition, but is mostly focused around buffing up your big game hunters, your netters, your harpooners, so a little bit of your skirmishing dudes. You've got some hexes there. Essentially, he's a hunter. It works out quite well because it gives you a little bit of variety. This mod is just insane. If you haven't played with Skaven Clans before, you're really missing out, because there's a lot of stuff there, especially when you're trying to see what the Skaven are really like. There's a lot that isn't just focused around the 4 major clans, and it's easily provided me hundreds and hundreds of hours of playtime. The second hero is the Wild Speaker. This one's a little bit different because it's also a spellcaster with a mix of different lores, and also it's got access to a bunch of extra skills, so you can go through Howling Pack, all the secret places, allowing you to be either a summoner, which is pretty damn good, or focus around just a few different buffs here and there. It allows for 2 different Wild Speakers in an army being very different. It's kind of like a marking system in a way, which is actually quite nice. It allows for heroes to be tailored very similar to that of the tabletop, where if you took one item, you couldn't take something else. Again, playing very different to the normal major clans, and yeah, it's a fun thing. It's one of those things that I know Games Workshop wanted to do originally, but then they never did. You've also got access to 2 different lord options, the first one being your Wind Speaker. So the Wind Speaker itself is kind of like a Skaven Shaman, taking very much inspiration from like the Savage Orc Shamans. Again, mix of a lore, so you'll be able to play around with a few different things, and its own unique skill line, which will have access to a wind there. You'll also have access to some buffs and debuffs towards your enemies. It's a pretty orky way of looking, and I kind of like it. It's a very interesting way of going around this. I like to see when the Skaven modders really try to experiment, and this is very, very obvious here. I think it's probably the better lord option, but then again, I tend to favor spellcaster lords more than anything else, which might not be ideal in some cases, because as you know, spellcasters are generally quite squishy. And then you've got access to the Overseer. So this is your Slave Master. It's going to focus very similar to that of like Chaos Dwarfs and stuff like that. It's decently armored. It's not great, but then again, it is a Skaven. You do have a bunch of summons there, which means that you'll be able to summon in units of slaves, reduce their upkeep, which works with your Skaven slaves too, so keep that in mind. If you want a free army running around next to you, that always works, barring obviously the general cost of the character. But you can also make it a Beastmaster, which means that it can summon in a Manticore, or if you start leveling up that skill line, you can also summon in a Captured Wyvern, so a big flying monster, making a lot more use of the Captured Wyvern than we have in vanilla at the moment. It's a bit of a shame, because I'd love to see them more in vanilla, as they are a fairly cool unit, and to be honest, who doesn't want a Wyvern, right? It's one of the really cool monsters in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Most of your building is going to focus around, well, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. I know it sounds really weird, but you'll be focusing very heavily on the specific units there, like War Pigs, for example, which there is a mixed unit, I really like that, but there's most of these guys, keep in mind, they're not the most technologically advanced when it comes to anything, like in terms of plagues or mutations and so on. They're just big angry boys, right? It's a pretty cool system. It does mean that you're going to be allowing yourself to be running more armies, as in most cases you're going to be using the bigger buildings just to get your bonuses, and you're not going to be using very expensive troops. I like it. It's very, very different. It's definitely a challenge, but keep in mind that those troopers themselves have access to physical resistance as if they were savage orcs. Now, we're not going to be doing the usual battle thing, mostly because we've seen Skaven like millions of times before, but I do want to highlight how freaking enormous the Skaven Clans mod is, because not only do you get a bunch of different playable factions, but you get a lot of different types of units too. It's probably it is one of my favorite mods in the Total War Warhammer modding community, because I love the Skaven, and it's just nice to see so much being done with it. You've got hundreds of units to play around with at this point. I think it's actually about close to 200 units. I'm not 100% too sure here. I haven't counted all the individual unit cards, but you can see there is an absolute lot. Instead, we'll briefly talk about comparison, which is like, for example, Savage Clan Rats attached to normal Clan Rats. The normal Clan Rats themselves will be able to hold the line very briefly, especially since they're kind of squishy, whereas the Savage Clan Rats will shine there. The extra physical resistance will make them a lot killier, a lot more defensive. They're still going to be Clan Rats, so they're nothing really like amazing, but the idea here is the variety of the different types of Clan Rats, which is seen throughout the lore, but never really explored about on the tabletop, nor on the video games either. It's a bit of a shame. And there is some unique units, so don't you worry about that. The idea is everything is supposed to be, savagified, I guess, is that a word? But you have some range units, you've got some War Pigs, which is a mixed unit, and I really like the idea of mixed units. We don't really see them anymore here. It used to be a thing in Total War, but I guess for Warhammer it doesn't really make too much sense because it does require a lot of extra work, but it's nice to see it over here too. I really, really like what this clan is. Very, very different, and definitely something that you're going to want to play around with if you are waiting for Creative Assembly to release a trailer for a DLC, for example. Because, yeah, they're taking their sweet-ass time, aren't they? And obviously, that's going to take a while before anything gets released, so it's nice to see a mod being updated from a very beloved team with some new content for people playing around with. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. The link to the mod will be in the description below. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.